Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to have you all here. And we are holding another STEM speaker series. And in STEM speaker series, we bring in individuals from different STEM backgrounds so that you can have an idea how vast is this field. And it can not just only be your degree like bachelor's, master's, PhD, but it can also be your hobby. So today we have a speaker who is a lawyer by profession, but he does this as a hobby, and it's a pretty cool hobby. So the main person behind all of this is Dr. Booth, and she is a professor. She's a geologist at the North Campus, and she is going to come and introduce Sam, to all of you. Dr. Liana Booth, she is a PhD. So a pretty cool professor. So anyhow, Liana, it's all yours. Dr. Booth, sorry.
Hi, folks. We're doing some troubleshooting on Zoom. It is my pleasure to be standing here in front of you as part of the STEM speaker series. Thank you so much for putting this together and putting all of your wonderful finishing touches on it. We're so excited to have your class here as well as some other people who are not part of your class. And we actually have 52 people on Zoom, which is really incredible, right? Without any further delay, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Sam Stubbs. He is one of the donors of the Houston Museum of Natural Science, and I actually met him there. How many people have been to the Houston Museum of Natural Science? Yeah, wow, awesome, fantastic. When you first walk into the paleontology hall, you take that left-hand turn and you start to learn about the evolution of life on Earth. And as you walk through that first part about the Cambrian time, you will see a whole bunch of trilobites. These are sort of the three segmented critters that to me were the cheerleaders of the Cambrian, right? Yeah, nodding some heads. Yes, we're familiar. Many of the specimens in the museum were actually donated by Mr. Stubbs here. And I want you to know that, as Dr. Nasir said, he's not a geologist. He's a lawyer. And so the reason that we've brought him in to speak with you today is because how many geology majors are here? That's what I thought. That's what I thought. So you might be taking this class to satisfy a science credit. You might be taking this class above chemistry, physics, biology because you said, oh, I've heard something about rocks. I've heard something about crystals. Fossils are interesting. I used to have a rock collection when I was a kid. For some reason, you enrolled in this class, and for some reason, you are logged in on Zoom on this talk. But it is our hope, your professor's hope, that this is going to be something that sticks with you for the rest of your life. You're going to find some really interesting facts from your time in your class. And you're going to forget most of it, but there's going to be like 5 interesting facts that stick with you for the rest of your life. That's about how much stuck with me from my linguistics class, which was absolutely fascinating, but I don't use it, right? And so it is my hope to inspire you to consider geology as a lifetime hobby. Continue to collect that rock collection, continue to collect that fossil collection, which is what Mr. Stubbs has done essentially from his entire life. So he's here to share his stories about collecting trilobites with us, and it is my great pleasure to hand the stage over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Booth. Can y'all hear me? Okay, fine. I'm a lifelong collector of rocks. I started as a somewhere around 4 or 5. It's a little worse than that. I collected not just rocks. I collected stamps, coins, and bullets, and cow bones, and insects, and everything else you can collect. That's called collector's disease. A lot of us are born with that, and it's genetic. My mother had it really badly. My grandfather had it really badly, and I was stuck with it. So I collected everything I could. Rocks in particular fascinated me because some of them were bright and colorful, and they were the diversity in the geologic specimens that you could find at a quote rock shop. If your parents took you on vacation and got to stop somewhere in Arkansas or North Carolina or Colorado, where they had rock shops. They didn't have rock shops where I grew up. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, next to the Mississippi River. That's a giant mud flat. There are no rocks in Baton Rouge. There are no mountains or no hills. It's flat. The river's almost a mile wide where my house is. And the river is this amazing thing that pulses up and down the middle of the country. But they don't have rocks, and yet I collected rocks. Well, how did that work? Well, the only rocks in Baton Rouge could be found in gravel pits. And a neighbor of mine, a couple of doors down, got a new gravel driveway. And when I was 6 years old, I looked at every rock in that driveway. And I found 2 trilobites. And it's impossible to find a trilobite that has been in Baton Rouge very long. It's certainly not hundreds of millions of years as these things tend to be. But apparently these had weathered out somewhere in the Ozarks and had been carried by the various rivers and streams into a gravel thing that became a gravel mine. And people that were selling driveways sent these rocks down, and 2 of them were trilobites. At 6, I knew what one was because my mother, being a collector of everything, a little eccentric, had given me a rock book, and in there were fossils, and there was pictures of trilobites. So I took them to show and tell in 2nd grade. And showed them to the teacher, and she'd never seen a trilobite before because she grew up in Baton Rouge too, and there are no rocks and there's no place to see a trilobite. And she said, "These are great. Can you leave them here?" And I said, "Sure. That's why else would anybody find the fossils? Why would they keep them if they didn't want other people to see them and learn from them?" So I left them there, and 3 or 4 days later, they called me in to tell me that somebody had stolen my 2 trilobites. I didn't see another one until I think I got out of law school. I may have seen one at the Smithsonian, but most museums don't have trilobites out on display. They may have some in the back. But I saw some after I got out of law school in Houston at a gem and mineral show, because I was going to go get some gems and minerals, because my young kids were going to be collecting rocks like I had genetically. So I went to the gem and mineral show to get rocks, and 2 of the, say, 65 dealers had trilobites for selling. I didn't know you could sell trilobites. So I kept coming to the gem and mineral shows, and I met a man there, an oil man that had one of the largest trilobite collections in the country. And he took me under his wing, became my mentor. Right before he died in 2000, I helped him come up with paperwork to donate some of his specimens to the Houston Museum. And they had to keep them on display for 15 years and things like that. We worked all that out. But in the meantime, he and I had been, he told me that if I cared about trilobites, I had to go to Tucson, to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. And if you've never been to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, it is something that you will want to do at some point in your lifetime. It's the world's largest gem, jewelry, mineral, and fossil show anywhere in the world. The dealers come from all over the world by the thousands, and they all set up in hotel rooms and in these camps. And every hotel room has a different dealer selling a different kind of fossil. Or a gem or jewelry or cut. The diamond merchants come from New York with briefcases affixed to their wrist, handcuffed to their wrist, because they're showing the cut stones to people that collect those kinds of things. But anyway, back to Trilobite. This particular Trilobite is one that I gave to the museum a while back. If you've been to that exhibit at the museum, you won't recognize it because it has to be lighted the way this one was lighted for you to be able to see through its tail. And its eyes have to be lighted to be able to see the fact that the eye facets have picked up the mineral iron. And in the fossilization process, either during it or after it, in the hundreds of millions of years, this is a Devonian trilobite that puts it at about 385 million years old. 385 million years is a long time. We call it deep time. You people are beginning to study geology. I'm sure you're beginning to get a grip on what deep time is. It's something that the human mind can't possibly grasp, because the human mind, there was no need to understand deep time when we evolved. When Homo sapiens sapiens evolved, there was no need to understand deep time. But there is now, because we all humans do things like, say, philosophy, where they want to know, who are we? Where did we come from? How did we get here? And they began looking for the origins. When were the first humans? When were the first primates? When were the first mammals? Where do we fit in? And how long ago was that? Well, that depends. When was the Earth formed? When was the solar system formed? Well, when was the universe formed? And you just keep asking questions and keep asking questions until somebody can do the math. And this is a STEM course, so a lot of you are having to take math, whether you like it or not. But it's important. If you can do the math, you can eventually get to an understanding of what deep time is. And it's so complicated. The human mind is probably the most complicated thing that we know of in the universe, and it pales in comparison to the understanding of the whole panoply of physics, chemistry, and the math that holds that together. Chemistry and physics are the same thing. If you're taking two different courses, they've gradually been merging all of my life, and now most of the colleges and universities are beginning to, first they put earth sciences into a package where geology used to be, and brought in the origins of the universe, and brought in the deep earth studies. But eventually you got you might have a chair in physics and a chair in chemistry, but they're doing the same thing. They're just doing it at a different scale. Scale is something that we'll get to here in the show, but let's move forward. Trilobites, there's something called nomenclature. By the way, there isn't anything I'm telling you today that I had any idea about. I didn't know any of this stuff when I started collecting trilobites after I got out of law school. Okay, so none of this stuff. Nobody had told me what a trilobite was, other than what the few things I had read about when my mother gave me a book when I was 6 years old. But Trilobita is the class, and it's an extinct class of arthropods. A class is real broad. Arthropods are the most prevalent of all the animal types in biology. If you're studying zoology, your arthropods include your insects, primarily insects, are so numerous, and then all of the crustaceans that you'll find, crabs, shrimp, all of those kind of things, and the centipedes, the millipedes, the spiders, the on and on. Arthropod is a joint-footed creature. Arthropod, and a joint-footed creature is usually a segmented animal, and that's true about the trilobite. It's in three segments. They call it trilobed. Most people think that's the head up there at the top with that big shield, and the thorax, like an insect has in the middle, which are the segments that articulate, that can roll up, and then a pygidium, or tail, at the end. But that's not the three lobes of a trilobite. The three lobes are this axial lobe down the middle, and the two lateral lobes on the side. The trilobite was named that in 1840. They started finding them in 1699 when a guy in Wales found what he called flatfish, and he published that in the Journal of the Royal Society, which was a society that studied things mainly in England, in London, that studied life. That's when the universities were really getting rolling on trying to understand where we came from, who we are, where, they were mapping out geology, they were coming up with stratification, the layers of the earth. They're trying to figure it all out. And when they found flatfish, they all thought they were so cool because it was clearly an animal. They could tell on some specimens that they had eyes, and there was nothing in the fossil record that had eyes. And when flatfish were found, they began noticing that they were found in Wales, but they had them over in France, they had them in Poland, they had them in Czechoslovakia, they had them almost everywhere they could check with other scientists. They had different species in different countries. And they started studying this stuff. They started writing these things down, and they had to start giving them names, and they had to figure out that they were all related, that they were a form of arthropod. They began a reign that spanned almost the entire Paleozoic. Now, the Paleozoic is an era that started at 541 million years ago, and that's over half a billion years ago. Again, we're talking about such deep time that it's just really kind of confusing. It's kind of hard to realize something that's 1,000 years ago. You try to turn it into a million, and then you try to turn it into 100 million, then you try to turn it into half a billion. It's just boggling. But it ran from 541 million years ago till the Permian, the end Permian, which is 251 million years ago. Do y'all recognize that as the Great Dying? Have you heard of the Great Dying? All right, it was the extinction event at the end of the Permian period that wiped out over 90% of all the life on Earth, both in the seas and on land. But the trilobites went extinct in Permian. Now, for the 100 million years before they went extinct, there was only one of the 10 classes of the 10 families, the 10 orders. I'm sorry, they break these things down. Taxonomy is something else you can study that I'd never heard of before I got a hold of trilobites. But taxonomy you have to name all the parts. And to name all the parts, or to figure out species, you have to be able to pick out the terminology, the words. You study your Greek, you study your Latin. They've used up every single Greek or Latin word that you can think of trying to use the Linnaean terminology. It's a binomial thing where you have to have a genus and then a species. So you'll see in some of these trilobite names, you'll see that there's a genus, and that's a group that's all very similar, and then a species that's different, that's separated. There's a reason why it has a different name. We'll get to that some more. But they began in the Cambrian explosion of multicellular life. And I saw 2 or 3 of you raise your hands when you with understanding, because you knew what the Cambrian explosion was. We went from single cell life to multicellular life in what seemed like a flash. It was really maybe at least 20 million years, maybe 40 million years, which is not exactly an explosion. But in geologic terms, that's an explosion. And what happened is the oceans had been filled since 3.8 billion, maybe as much as 4 billion years with single cell life. And it had diversified. There were different kinds. There were some that were leaning towards the plants and some leaning towards the animals, but they weren't. It was kind of hard to tell them apart, and it still is. But all of a sudden the single cells started forming into mass, and they look kind of like algae on the bottom of the shallow seas or the lakes or even the rivers. But all life was in the oceans when the trilobites came along. There wasn't any life out there on the land. Well, why is that? Well, the sun sends out such harsh rays that that life couldn't exist on the surface of the earth. Not until the single cells invented something called photosynthesis and spent a couple of billion years cranking out, taking carbon dioxide, from global warming, what carbon dioxide it's carbon and oxygen, two elements that your periodic table is over there on the wall. You can get to know that periodic table and approach life through that periodic table. I'll tell you, if I'm lucky, I'll have time to tell you a story about that. But carbon dioxide, the single cells learned to use the sun's energy to split that, and the oxygen was free. And the free oxygen permeated the oceans, and where the single cells lived, and it permeated as they floated up, permeated the atmosphere. Eventually, most of what was formed was O2, the oxygen with 2 atoms of oxygen clumped together. O3 was a product that rarely, but like for every 500 O2s, there was one O3. Well, O3 is ozone. Everybody's heard of the ozone layer. It started to accumulate above the earth, and the ozone layer was bouncing back those sun's rays. And about the time of we move into the Ordovician about 485 million years ago. There was enough ozone up there to bounce away enough stuff for the mats and the slimes, the molds, the lichens, the other single cells to go out onto the land. And so we began, but the trilobites never made it. They stayed in the ocean. And they stayed in the ocean through 4 major periods: the Cambrian, the Ordovician, the Silurian, and the Devonian. And each one of those saw an extinction event that wiped them out, and another round of speciation. And the people that really want to understand deep time and evolution have to look at this fossil record and have to turn to the trilobite and to try to figure out how diverse life became as it moved from the Cambrian to the Ordovician, from the Ordovician to the Silurian to the Devonian. And the Devonian, there was that later time, which the trilobite, that one was Devonian. This one is a sorority, which was Ordovician, but by the Devonian, there was this arms race between the cephalopods and the trilobites, and the trilobites were evolving different species that had spikes and spines and other defense mechanisms. And by then, in the Ordovician, we had the jawed fishes came along, and the trilobites began with the ability to enroll, and we'll get to that pretty soon. I've talked enough about collecting. This right here is an interesting trilobite. It's the most common trilobite known it's called an Elrathia kingi. Elrathia is the genus, and kingi is the species. And it's found in Utah, in Wheeler, and in the Wheeler Shale. And what I'm pulling out right here is a growth series of Elrathia kingi. The Elrathia kingi formed. It's a late middle Cambrian species that came along about 510 million years ago. It's one of the older trilobites, but it had some characteristics that, for some reason, this is a good representation of one. You can see that it's thick. For whatever reason, these things popped out of little nodules. Everyone in this list, they're just growing. The one down there at the bottom is an adult. It's got all the same number of segments, and that's because they're born in a larval stage that doesn't even look like a trilobite. But the larval stage adds one segment, then two segments, then three segments, and it begins to look like a trilobite. At some point, it gets all enough to be an adult, but by the way, they molt. Molting is where the exoskeleton becomes brittle. The animal wants to grow. It splits out, and for the first 10 or 12 of this trilobite's life, it added a segment. But once it got to the maximum number of segments, then it kept on growing, but it didn't add any more segments. And so the one down there at the bottom is fully grown, and the one up here at the top is fully grown. But this one's a lot older, and it lived through a lot more molts. Let's put that down. The jewelers of the world have used Elrathia kingi, and almost exclusively, because there's so many of them. Two, you can find them by the millions in the Wheeler Shale in Utah. And three, they come in all shapes and sizes, so you can match earrings or studs for your tuxedo or your cufflinks, whatever, great big pendants I gave my mom lots of pendants since she started me on trilobites. Here's a trilobite that I obtained from the fourth generation of people in Utah that have been mining, they have been finding and helping science name trilobites, and they found this one and several others like it. Because the predecessors to the Ute Indians, I think they call them. I didn't put that other one in there. There's another one. But the Ute Indians found them and drilled them and wore them as pendants, or hung them from their headgear, or hung them on their horses. And that's been documented from an ethnographic standpoint. But in any event, the they call them stone animals, or the animal that lives in a stone house. And they understood that was an animal. Now you'll notice the difference between this particular one and this one. This one right here has something called the free cheeks. When the animal molts, there's a seam here between the free cheek on this side, which is right next to the eye. Then the nose part of the glabella, and then there's another free cheek over on this side. And what happens is as the animal starts to grow, it puts a lot of pressure on the exoskeleton, and it pops that seam, and the animal crawls out. Kind of like a larva will crawl out of its cocoon. And the one here is missing its free cheeks. And of the millions and millions and millions of Elrathias, you notice all of mine had their free cheeks were still in place, but millions and millions and millions don't. But they still preserve, and you can still tell it's an animal. You can still tell them there's something going on, but it's just not complete. This is another example of Elrathia kingi, and you'll notice one was black, one was brown. That's got a lot to do with the geology of the particular seabed that they were found in. They were all found in the same general giant ocean in the middle of what was a continent that was, because of plate tectonics, on the move. Plate tectonics moves all of the plates around at the rate your fingernails grow. And the Cambrian came at a time when the Cambrian explosion gave us trilobites. It did that when the continents were breaking apart. Now you say, breaking apart, they must have been with Pangea. No, it was the one before Pangea. The continents come together, break apart, come together, break apart, and they've done it at least 5 times. And they were breaking apart from the Laurentia / Gondwana land were breaking apart, and the trilobites burst into the fossil record. First animal with a hard exoskeleton. That's why they fossilized. There were other multicellular animals. There were other arthropods at the same time as the trilobites, but the trilobites had the hard exoskeleton. Plus, they had things that nobody else knows if they ever existed or not, because they were in soft-bodied creatures that don't fossilize. It's very difficult to tell if the eyes were there or not. And it's hard for an eye to even survive without the protection of an exoskeleton. But anyway, these two found over in an area that picked up more of a brown mineral, and maybe a little bit of iron in there. This one right here, and we'll probably cover this if we got enough time, but this is the dorsal side, dorsal, D-O-R-S-A-L. That's the top side, that's the back. You're looking down at the trilobite, and that's what it looks like. This is the ventral side, the underside. It's the underside that's the flap of this side. So what you're seeing here is not what you would see if the animal were alive, because that's covered with limbs. Each segment had a biramus limb that had both a leg, a joint-footed leg, or that's why they're arthropods, and it had a gill structure coming for each segment, and then 3 segments up in the front, antenna up at the front. And we'll get to that just right now. Let's get to that now. You see those 2 arrows? They're pointing at something. Well, they're pointing at a little antenna, and the antenna would have extended out through to the past what they call the doblure, the edge of the trilobite's exoskeleton. and would have extended out for them to feel around. They were bottom dwelling creatures that crawl around in the shallow seas. But the interesting thing about this specimen, the reason that I bought this specimen, the reason that I have it, is because of the millions of Elrathia king eyes found and turned into jewelry all over the world. They're all found in Utah, but the jewelry is gone all over the world. Nobody's ever seen their antenna. Everybody assumed they had them because they know about antenna through some real special formations called lagerstatins, where the soft body parts, the legs, the gills, the digestive tract, the antenna, and some of the other specialty organs are all preserved. And there's one particularly famous thing that was found right about the late 1800s, early 1900s by Professor Wheeler Beecher, I'm sorry, in Beecher's beds, where the trilobites were formed in this little tiny layer, just 3/4 of an inch wide, but the trilobites there preserved all the salt parts, and starting around 1904, they began to be able to tell you what the trilobite actually looked like, with how many legs and how many gills, and what the antennas looked like, and they were preserved with the mineral pyrite. Everybody know what pyrite is? Fool's gold. It's sulfur and iron, two elements, sulfur and iron, pyrite. It's a mineral that you'll see that some trilobites that it picks some of it up. I have a collection of Beecher's beds of the pyrite trilobites, but they're not really from when Beecher closed his beds about the time that he died, and they thought they were played out. A friend of mine, the guy that sold me this trilobite, friend of mine went and opened them up again. He didn't open them right where they were digging, where Beecher dig. He went 20 kilometers away and followed the trend and opened up a whole new section. And since 2014, he's sold them as the gold bugs. And you can go to Tucson, go to his room and buy gold bugs that showed you the parts. They weren't Elrathia king eyes, but they were mainly the Triorthrus species. But there they are up close, really up close. Well, this is a Russian Ordovician bug. The two most prolific spots on Earth right now where you can find trilobites, particularly of species, are Russia near the St. Petersburg region and Morocco. Morocco has had an ongoing love affair with trilobites in particular, but fossils in general, because they preserve all the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, and Devonian layers are well preserved in Morocco. And for 50 years, they've been cranking out specimens. Now, most of the time, I'm going to be able to cover some of this stuff. Get to this was, well, I'm past it.
This man sent a starter file that was like 200 slides long.
Yeah, I've cut this back. I've cut this, I added a few things, but I cut back a lot. There's almost no little subtle part that we've begun to discuss here that we couldn't go off on rabbit trails on. And that's my problem, is I see something and go, well, I need to tell you about that rabbit trail, and that rabbit trail. And it's hard to synthesize it enough for one class. Maybe I can come back later or maybe only those that you aren't bored of tears can find me later, and we will take it from there. What I want to impress upon you is that, well, here's the dorsal ventral showing a Russian underneath with something called the mouth plate. It's the hypostome, is what they call it. But that's the dorsal back, and this is what it looks like underneath. Anyway, and for years, I brought a couple of these, but I didn't bring them in the car. This is the exoskeleton, the dorsal exoskeleton of a trilobite. One of the most common of the big 6-inch trilobites, thick, looked alive, not flat. A lot of trilobites are flat, mainly Cambrian bugs. They're half a billion years old. They've been around for so long, the sediments have compacted and crushed them flat. These in Devonian, much younger, only 350 million years old, are often puffy and look alive. And I kept saying, well, why do you just prepare the outside? Why do you prepare the dorsal side? And I finally got one of my dealers to prep both sides. And that's the same bug that's his dorsal and that's his ventral. And the ventral, includes this mouth plate that's called the hypostome that nobody even knew was there for the first 3 decades that I collected these trilobites. But I kept saying, prepare one from the other side, and not only that, they would say, no, the shell will fall apart. They're where the exoskeleton, where the segments are, it's too weak. The shell's not thick enough. I said, wrong. That's a thick shell, And finally, they did it. These things right here sticking out that look like little ribs. That's where the musculature of the trilobite had to attach for it to enroll. You can't be a creature that rolls up into a ball without muscles, and you can't use those muscles unless they're affixed to the segment so that they can instantaneously enroll. We'll quickly do naming. I got to meet a brilliant man that sometime around 2000, I went to London and met Dr. Richard Ford. He's the most famous person that's ever studied trilobites. He graduated from Cambridge with a PhD and has taught at Oxford, and he's been the keeper of invertebrate paleontology at the British Museum. This is his 2000 book, written in 2000, published in 2000, called Trilobite: Eyewitness to Evolution. I went and found this guy because anytime you get off into a subject to study, you're going to want to find the experts. You're going to want to find somebody that really knows what they're talking about. You're going to want to get their book. You want to read it. And if you catch a break and find yourself in the right town, and there they are, you're making a mistake if you don't go meet that expert. And that's what I did. I then ended up sending him certain trilobites because he was one of the 5 namers that named trilobites. You name a trilobite by finding a new species and getting it to a namer, and then the namer tries to determine whether or not it already has a name, because trilobites are found in a lot of different places in a lot of different languages. They publish the literature on this. Well, the namer has to know the literature from all countries and then come up with a name. And this particular one is at the museum. It's called Lycocephalus Stubb's eye. Well, my last name is Stubbs, and the reason it's named Stubb's eye is because I gave it to Richard Forty. I actually gave this one to my museum. The specimen has to be in a museum or facility that scholars can come to and study. You can't own it and get it named, because that would give you something more valuable and that you could make money. Everybody hates money making in the fossil business. So I had to give this one to the museum, and I had to send him another one. And then he was able to write the naming paper. He'd asked me to go find this because he knew the guy in Morocco that had it, Dr. Ibrahim Tahiri, who's a PhD in Morocco that has his own museum. But that guy had been buying from, I had been buying from for years, but he's a hard negotiator. And so he wouldn't, he let a picture out on the internet. Richard Forty saw it, wanted it, got me, said, can you get that for me? I said, because I want to name it. I said, okay, I'll try. It took me about 6 years and a ridiculous amount of money and a lot of negotiations because he knew he had me. And so he wouldn't come down. I wasn't going to pay it. And it just finally he came down to within some reasonableness. But that's why it's called a Lycopephalus. That's the genus. And Stubb's eye is the species. And that's me. But so anyway, that's how naming works quickly. This is important for scale because you see there's a penny and there's that beautiful bug. And there's the mug shot of the bug. There's the side lateral money shot of the but if you were going to publish something, you'd put that picture in because it has more appeal. You got the eye. You can see the long swooping eye. This is a different specimen of the same species. These are mugshots of a different kind because the people that care about trilobites are in all kinds of, they're in all kinds of arts and crafts and things like that, and they have to make a living. And people make great T-shirts, great ceramics. I'm wearing a belt buckle. It's pretty serious. Where I got to know the artist, and here's some belt buckles that are out there. There's a website from a Hawaiian PhDs, an ecologist. A lot of the people that are in trilobitology, they seem to do it all the time, or in some other field. He's a PhD in ecology, but he lives in Hawaii where they don't have rock. They don't have anything other than volcanic rocks, which there are no trilobites in volcanic rock. So you have anyway. He's got a website that's one of the 50 top science websites in the world, and he did that in his spare time by setting up a small website that grew. And I was able to get like 10 or 12 of my trilobites as Trilobite of the Month at Sam Dunn's site. This is a fabulous crystal trilobite. Doesn't look crystal, does it? But there, if you backlight it, that's what it looks like. I'm working on a whole chapter of a book on crystal trilobites. There's one of mine that's what it looks like in natural light. That's what you look like if you hold it up to the window. There's another one, and another one. And there, this is so fine.
Oh, wow.
That's the guy's eye. And it's called a schizocoral eye. There's holocoral eyes, schizocoral eyes. And remember, I didn't know any of this stuff. I never heard of words like schizocoral or holocoral. But it comes to you slowly. It takes decades. You got to just relax. You don't be in a hurry because you can't learn it all at once, even though I've come to get it to you in 45 minutes. But that's a schizocoral eye. It has a sclera around each lens, and each lens is separate. The holocoral eye has it might have 1,000 lenses or 200 lenses, but it's just all in a sheet without the sclera separating the lenses. And I have to wrap it up. So I'm not going to be able to tell you much about enrollment, but there's some really fun enrollment going on up there on the screen. And that one's fine. This is the same genus, two different species. The only difference is that how many rows of eye facets. They're both Eldredgeops, but one the last name is something else. I gotta go. Thanks very much.
We have some time for Q&A.
Okay, yeah, and it's time for Q&A. So maybe I can use some slides for Q&A.
Do you have a slide of the gold bug?
I don't think I put one in there.
And do you have a slide of a bug with the antennas and all the soft parts?
I do have some antennas coming up here. There's one. This is about a 10-inch trilobite. It's a big trilobite. And it comes from an area in Morocco called Fezawada. Fezawada, about 20 years ago, started cranking out a bunch of new trilobites. It was an area that the Moroccans hadn't touched. And then suddenly I'm starting to get bugs from Fezawada. I don't know the difference. I didn't even pay much attention to species names back then. But Fezawada has a Lagerstätte where salt parts are being found. And this one came my way, and that's the segmented antenna coming out of the front of that trilobite. And nobody can believe that came out of Morocco, because they had 40, 50 years before that of just kind of black bugs. This is Moroccan too, by the way, but prepped from both sides, and you can see through that one like that. And it looks like a spaceship. And that's another one in the museum that just a different prep artist did that one. And this is one I just came back from Tucson with this one, where that same species that you saw is it picked up red. It picked up iron. And iron, the iron will send them from yellow through orange into red. And this whole thing called the couche rouge is what they call this layer where they come out red. Here's the same one, only it came out yellow. And that's one from St. Petersburg, Russia, that comes out tan like almost all of them do. There's not much color variation there. There's one with the frill, that big round frill called the harpies is the family. And this one wraps all the way around the bug, and it sits down in there. Never seen one before this past Tucson, and I came home with that one.
And what gives it the black color?
The black color, say that again?
What gives it the black color?
It is whatever was in the matrix at the time. It was in the sea at the time, and it is a calcite, which is made of calcium and silicon. But that's what the exoskeleton was made out of. So you don't know if it's the same calcite that was in the exoskeleton to begin with, or whether it picked up some more, because the limestone is also a form of calcite, and you can't use acid to make these things appear, because the acid that eats up the matrix, the limestone, will also eat up the calcite shell of the trilobite. But it is a good question. And again, another harpid trilobite. This one had a frill around the edge, and these little bitty pits all the way around. And there have been speculation for decades about what those pits were for. Might have something to do with filter feeding. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the truth. Any more questions? Oh, by the way, this one picked up a little bit of iron, and the rest limestone, and this one picked up pyrite. Same species, same slightly different places on different side of the mountain.
So that is a gold bug.
That is a gold bug, but not of the kind you were asking about. You were asking about the triarthrosis that come out of the beachers beds in upstate New York. This is a Moroccan trilobite. And that's another.
Sam, we did have a question, and it came in on Zoom. Oh gosh, just tell us about it.
Okay, all right. This is a fun one. This is a Conoprusia boltonite, and Mr. Bolton must have been the one that gave him that one. The prep artist that lives in Oregon, I got to know years ago when he was a young guy, and he's old now, as I am. But this Conoprusia, that's it from the side, and you see what it looks like feet down here. They're not feet; those are segments. Each of the segments would have had those spread out in the lateral lobes, 3 lobes by height. But the study those feet and see what they look like because they're gonna play, there they are up close, where you can really see them. And there they are on another specimen that I've given to the museum, where in two different shots, where you can really see how how the end of those plural lobes look. And then we get to this.
Oh, wow.
And 3 Tucsons ago, which would have been a little over 2 years ago, because we just finished February, 1st February, end of January. I bought this from a dealer that I've known and trusted for many years because I watched him grow up. And he lives in Morocco, Spanish for European American. And he married a Houston girl who went over there from the museum on a museum trip and married him. And they raised a daughter, but then they split and she's now back here in Houston. But this Trilobite, I got from him, but I was a little suspicious of this Trilobite. I thought there was something funny about it, but I wasn't that suspicious because I looked down here and saw these little, you see those little feet? And I went, man, all that's happening is this thing is speciating and growing taking the pattern that genetics will pass along through the genes and putting it into the segments. So I made him go find another one and sell me that one. And he showed up at the museum about 6 months ago with the second one. And I had to buy that second one too, even though it wasn't as nice looking. This was a better specimen. They were starting to crop up. And like this past Tucson, there were about 6 of them that were out there somewhere. If you want to buy them, they appeared on the internet. Meanwhile, I've had a guy that I trust that is the best light guy in the world who photographs these things. And he started as a prep artist. And he's learned more about light and trilobites than anybody that's ever lived. And he told me, I am still suspicious about these spines up here. I'm seeing carving. I'm seeing some sort of carving. I can't explain it. There's no the UVA, UVB, UVC ultraviolet light does not show up that it's fake. Because if it was paint or putty or resin, you could see it on by taking it under UV ultraviolet light. And he took them under ultraviolet light. He didn't see anything, but he still was suspicious about the way things were carved. Turns out through some German prep artists that this isn't fake. It's the same starting with the same Conoprusia bug, which does have 1 or 2 little bitty spiny things sticking out on the long swooping spines that come overhead. But if you do it right, you're prepping the bug. The bug is buried in a matrix, this stuff down here. And the matrix can be left in place if you take enough time and effort to carve out those spines. So Moroccans who have all the time in the world and the expertise now, they didn't used to do prep work. They carved each one of those out of the matrix so that UVA light is still picking up the same calcite that's in the limestone and is in the calcite shell of the animal. So
it's fake. That's
fake. I mean, it's not completely fake. There's a real trilobite under there, but they dressed it up, and that's how dangerous the world is now.
We're gonna have to leave it at that. We are
Yeah.
out of time.
All right, and this is a Russian bug that's at the museum. You'll kind of think it's boring. It looks like that crawling over a hill, but that's not what it was. That's just the way it's preserved, and that's it from the front. But you can't. It doesn't look like that. It looks because you've seen it blown up, and you've got light coming through it, and it's translucent. It's all a matter of what light hits it as to what they look like. But anyway, that's it. If anybody wants to stay around for questions off the record, I've got time. and we'll take it from there.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
That was unbelievable. Very interesting.
Thank
Quick
you.
question from Zoom. What's the biggest you've ever seen?
I have that Lycopcephalus Stubb's eye is close. There's another one at the museum that I gave them that's maybe a little bit bigger. They get up to, I think, 28 inches is the biggest one known. And they get down to a couple of millimeters adult. So the spectrum of growth is just tremendously varied. They're kind of like Amazonian insects. They can be real tiny, real big, and they can have spikes and spines and goofy appendages sticking out. It's crazy speciation. So the biology people get to work.
Dr. Booth, how many people on there? If you can give me the number.
62
Wow.
people on. Thank you, Zoom World.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And please do stick around. As you can tell, he could talk forever.
But
So if you have interest, please do stick around. Is this like a lady would ask, a gentleman would never tell? What's the most expensive specimen you've purchased?
It's a little hard to say because of the fact you buy plates, and sometimes a plate has multiple specimens.
Okay.
I brought home for the museum when I'm actually going to keep it, but it's a migration plate. It's 65 inches long and it's 30 inches wide, and it shows two different species, maybe three, trilobites in a migration form. They're all headed in the same direction. They're all following a path, and that's behavior. That's learning from rocks. Behavior is the toughest thing there is, and they're beginning to do that in certain parts of Morocco. They're beginning to see these patterns. The horseshoe crab migrates that way in long chains, and all of the other animals that migrate, the wildebeest, the birds, so they all move in the same direction. They all listen to the music of the spheres and the magnetic fields, and they follow those things, and they go with the seasons, and they go to places they eat, places they mate. They travel with the seasons. They're all so sensitive to their environment. That's where evolution comes from, being sensitive to your environment and either making it in that environment or not. That's why most 99 point some odd of the species that have ever existed are extinct now.
Sam, would you like to say something to our Zoom audience? Camera is right there.
Oh, hello, Zoom audience. Sorry I didn't get to meet you in person, but maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Dr. Booth, would you like to say something?
Thank you again for attending. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone. We are going to shut down Zoom. So thank you for joining us. And we are excited that you'll be able to do it again. Bye-bye.
Did you already stop the recording?
No, I didn't. So
I can't find the stop recording.